But when they looked at that body, and there were a host of them there, in addition to nurses, they, for example, looked at the neck. He had a puncture wound in the neck. Before they did a tracheotomy over that, they looked at it. Now these are doctors in Dallas. Dallas is a hot ding-dong town. Shooting goes on all the time. Fridays and Saturdays, that place is mobbed with victims of shooting, okay? These guys see corpses, and they see people with bullet wounds constantly. When they looked at that wound in the throat, they said, not knowing what the official story was going to be, they said immediately, oh, that's a frontal wound. We'll do a tracheostomy over it to relieve the breathing. All of them agreed to that. All of them later on, when questioned, who were in that room, said the back of the president's head was blown off. Blown off. That came from a shot from the front. In terms of ballistics, every one of them, the nurses and the doctors, all looked back there, said there's a massive exodus back over the right ear. Okay, so this is the way they left that situation. If you continue along those lines in terms of Kennedy's wounds, the first one the death certificate that was composed by Dr. Berkeley, who was Kennedy's physician. Now this is before the politics of the case has descended over here. Dr. Berkeley, when he looked at Kennedy and when he had an opportunity at Parkland Memorial Hospital to do a birth, to take a look and write a death certificate, he looks at JFK's wounds, and he has in the report he gives, he has the wound in the back at the third thoracic vertebrae, third thoracic, not cervical. Ultimately, in order to orient politically the fact that a shot came from the rear, that thoracic wound is moved up to the neck. It's a migrating wound. I guess that does happen. Now, I don't know of any, official account of that happening anyplace else. But that's where it ends when the report is submitted. It is no longer a third thoracic vertebrae. It is a cervical vertebrae. That was important because then this neck wound, entry wound, becomes a wound of exit, because the shooter, and nobody has demonstrated to me that Oswald, neither of these two fellows here, that Oswald was in fact on the 6th floor. The evidence is he was not on the 6th floor. The evidence is he was in front of the building. I won't go into that. But there are people who saw him in the front of the building. And it's too much to go into. But I'm satisfied in my own mind in terms of the evidence, Secret Service evidence, and other evidence of people who were on those front steps. It was Lee Harvey Oswald who was the man in the doorway. I don't know if you know anything about that. Lovelady is the guy that the commission appoints to that position, but it's Oswald. And the reason is because he can't be on the 6th floor and on the 1st floor at the same time. But that's where he was, as far as I'm concerned. Ultimately, we end up with a situation, as Max had delineated here in terms of his view, of 3 shots were fired, 2 hit, 1 misses, has to go downrange to account for a TEG bullet. There is a bullet scar on a curb down under the overpass where Jim Tegg was standing. The Dallas police, sheriff's office were down there. They examined. They said, yes, there's a bullet. That's a bullet smear on that curb. Ultimately, that curb will be patched, okay, before there's any examination of it to see if there's any copper or anything like that. So that there are 3 shots fired, 2 shots hit. And the bullet that is the non-lethal bullet, the one that hits Kennedy in the head, the bullet that's a non-lethal bullet, 399, that's recovered. It is in virtually pristine condition, a little bit of flattening. And yet that is the bullet that goes allegedly now, as the wound is moved up. Even Jerry Ford gets involved in this later on. He'll move the wound up on the back for neatness purposes. As he says, he's caught on doing that. And he said, I just did that for neatness purposes. So we end up with a situation of a bullet that gone through, this is the bullet that will have gone through JFK, will have gone through Connolly, and will blow out his left wrist. There is a hole in his left wrist, and when that bullet ends into evidence, it is in virtually pristine condition. It is a little bit flattened. Now, I will end this. Let me just end it this way in terms of my own limited experience. In 51, 52, I was in Korea. I was in grave registration. You went out, rounded up. The early part of the war, the campaign was waged with the Chinese, sending masses of troops to just simply overrun our men in the field. And so you had this incredible hectocomb of bodies all over the place. And so both sides, U.S. and the Chinese, called a truce, and I was with the grave registration people, and I would go out there and help clean up the body. It was incredible. We had little Chinese flags. We put them on the Chinese dead bodies. The Chinese had little American flags, sort of like something out of a liquor glass or something. They put on the American bodies. But when you saw what ammunition can do to people, now this is military ammunition, okay, but still, 399 could not have inflicted those kind of damages on Connolly's wrist and remained in pristine condition. Every doctor who looked at that case, even ultimately the three autopsists or the three doctors who at Bethesda Naval Hospital, two of them hadn't seen blood in years. They were administrators. They did the autopsy. And the reason they did the autopsy, because they were military and they were under military control at the time that autopsy was done. And so they didn't do a thorough autopsy at all. They were not allowed to. They were curtailed. So these are some of the problems I have with my colleagues here, Max, and with David, okay?
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you very much. We'll let David Kaiser come in, and he's established clearly he does not think Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy. He thinks he was a patsy. But maybe one way to expand it a little, David, take on your rebuttal. But also one thing that I've been haunted by, why once Oswald was captured and he was the killer of Kennedy, why when he was interrogated, is there no record, tape recordings or writing? I always don't understand that part of it.
All right, that first. There's no tape recording, but there is a record. I've read the record many times. There's a record of the question and answer. Now, there are two odd men out in this whole argument. Well, actually, there's one man, me, and a committee of the House of Representatives, and its chief counsel, Robert Blakey, who was a friend of mine insofar as somebody can be a friend who you've never actually met face to face. And we have a number of things in common, but one of them is that we're not liked by either the Church of the Lone Assassin or the Church of the Grand Conspiracy, and they don't quite know what to do with us. Because now, I mentioned the Assassination Committee because they looked very carefully in every way they could into the issues of autopsy, ballistics, where Kennedy and Connolly were sitting, and everything else in the late 70s. There are reports online in several places now. You can read every separate report. And they reached very clear conclusions that yes, Oswald's gun did fire the bullets, that yes, there were only two bullets that hit, that they came from the same gun, that they came from Oswald's gun, and that there was no shot that hit from the front. And that's why I didn't feel it necessary to go into all that, and I still don't. Now, all I can say to you, Max, is that it's amazing to me that you're not even willing to confine your criticism to what I said, and that you couldn't resist saying that I was part of the Church of the Grand Conspiracy too, and that, and I quote, you said that I said that Oswald was part of a conspiracy involving dozens or hundreds. Now let me ask for a show of hands in this room. How many people heard me say that Oswald was part of a conspiracy involving dozens or hundreds? Please raise your hands if you heard that. Thank you. I specifically said when I referred to the network that I was not saying that everybody in the network was involved. I named 3 people who I said were definitely involved. I mentioned that every one of those people, to greater or lesser extent, to a greater or lesser extent, or more or less reliable extent, admitted that they were involved, and that's all I said. I said there were other suspects, but that's all I said. There's nothing else really that I can say based on what the other panelists said, but I hope I'll have time to take a question or two about any aspect of what I said from you all.
The other David, come on up. And also, I'm wondering, is there any going with the 50th anniversary? Is there any more footage or photography that's being found? Do you know what are the new artifacts being found from that day, in addition to challenging some of these guys?
I'm not familiar with any, but the old is sufficient. That's all you need. So my basic observation is that Lee Harvey Oswald was not involved in the shooting of President Kennedy. I believe that he was an Orwellian in political orientation. He was anti-Marxist, anti-communist, anti-socialist. He had an intelligence number of 110449, and we know many other aspects about him. As far as I can tell, he's not related to anything devious. He seems always to have been patriotic. But with respect to Max Holland's observations, I've read everything he has written from the 1990s on, and I've gone over them all with fact check, and I must say that they match what he presented here today, and almost every fact he presented will fall upon the most casual reference to the evidentiary base. That this shot here, this single bullet theory, came in June. It came after they couldn't resolve the TEG shot. And to resolve that TEG shot, which was brought forward to the commission by the U.S. attorney in Dallas, to the commission, they had to do it. Someone in authority had said there's another person shot here. So they came up with that single bullet theory. It had been cooking on the back burners for a while, but they did that. But more than that, this depiction of the wounds on Kennedy, this throat wound, during the autopsy, they didn't find it. It's after the corpse had left the morgue, and they phoned Dallas. They were told there was a bullet hole in the front, so the autopsy doctor just put one in, and they made it a exit wound, not an entrance wound. But every medical authority, every medical doctor, every surgical nurse said it was an entrance wound. It was about 3 millimeters circle with a bruise ring, and these are experts in ballistics. And his wrist wound, that was from the grassy knoll. This is by Joseph Dolce, Dr. Joseph Dolce, a military surgeon. And the thigh wound is part of the single bullet theory. We know from the X-ray radiologists and so forth that there was no bullet hole in Kennedy's left leg. There was a tiny flake, and they got around that by not calling the surgeon who looked at it to testify. Well, the Warren Commission deliberately, knowingly, willfully were trapped. And I think it's one of the great crimes of history that people don't come forward to defend the Chief Justice. And in terms of them being lawyers, you left out, I believe, one of the most interesting points. They didn't have the adversary proceedings work. There was no adversary present. It was all secret and no one there to question things. And as Wigmore said, the great intellectual, the adversary system of justice is the greatest invention of the human race. And it's missing. And I think that's the Achilles heel of the Warren Commission. I regret I didn't have time to go over each of my esteemed colleague Max Holland's points one by one, but I would love to do it.
The reason I'm asked about new information in the last couple of years, just maybe about a half a year ago now, 6 months ago, they have found the tape on Air Force One going from Dallas to Washington, D.C., which had been edited by the Warren Commission. Now they have the full tape. So there is constant flow of bits and pieces that are coming forward. What they all add up to is another story. Max, you've got plenty to defend, and go for it.
Well, let me just say in response to David, anybody who reads his book, it has a cast of dozens, if not hundreds, of people who were culpable in the assassination according to his analysis. He didn't say exactly that this afternoon, but read his book. Now here's a picture, altered from the Secret Service. Yes, I have. Here's an altered picture from the Secret Service training film and stills that was made 5 days after the assassination. The ghost car standing in for the presidential limousine is the approximate position within a few feet of the president's car when Zapruder started his camera. Now that's important because it's not generally recognized that Zapruder's film actually has two segments. The first segment, of about 7 seconds, consists of motorcycle policemen driving by. And film in those days was precious. Plus his camera was hand wound with a spring. So when all he did see was motorcycle policemen driving by, he stopped his camera. And he waited until he was sure that the president was in view. This is frame 132 from his film. This is frame 133. The car is much further into Dealey Plaza than was commonly understood. He never pretended that he had filmed the car making the whole turn. In fact, if you read his testimony, he said he only heard 2 shots. So my explanation for what happened, and it's not shared by everyone, of course, is that Oswald, being the good Marine that he was, fired a shot before the Zapruder film started, or restarted, to be technical. Because Oswald fired at the upper body mass. Now, interestingly, there were 2 witnesses, one way back here and another at the other side of this architectural feature in Dealey Plaza, who said in their very early statements to the Dallas authorities, when the first shot sounded, the president was passing a black and white highway sign. Now, this sign is no longer in Dealey Plaza. It's the old U.S. highway badge signs, black and white. So, what am I saying here? Oswald fired a shot when it was suitable for him, because you have to remember the Zapruder film mesmerized everybody to the point where it became the representation of the assassination. You can't think of the assassination without seeing it through Zapruder's eyes. But of course, Oswald had no idea Zapruder was there. He had no communication with him. He didn't have a walkie-talkie and said, "Abe, are you ready? I'm going to start shooting." He shot when it suited him. And therefore, the first shot was fired before Zapruder restarted his camera. Now, what does that mean in terms of an explanation? The first shot missed, I believe, because it hit that mast overhanging Elm Street. That would account for the jacket separating from the lead core of the bullet. And several witnesses said they saw something strike the pavement at the moment the first shot sounded. Then the lead core goes down into Dealey Plaza. It hits this concrete skirt around a manhole cover. Other witnesses said there was a burst of dust around that skirt. And then it hits this curb that was referred to earlier, where a witness named James Tague was standing nearby. And he had some blood on his cheek, either from a piece of concrete from the curb or possibly the lead core. And that's what I believe happened to the first shot. Now, what's the importance of that? If the timing is as I believe it is, that means Oswald fired 3 shots in a little over 11 seconds, which is eminently doable, easy for even a Marine of his riflemanship. So what am I trying to say here? I believe the Warren Commission missed an opportunity to present a clear, convincing, single explanation of what happened. Now, I talked to several of the Warren Commission staff members. Some of them are indifferent to this explanation. They say, well, we got the shots that hit the president correctly. And yes, they did. And you can't dispute that. But if they had identified what happened to the first shot, then there would not have been none of this 6 seconds in Dallas business, which is a meme that people still remember. And there would have been an explanation that would have been persuasive about the shooting sequence. Now, of course, that doesn't explain all the other problems and issues that have to be gone into. But I'm suggesting that it's a way of looking at the Warren Commission. You cannot impeach their findings, even if I'm correct. It doesn't impeach their findings. It improves on their findings. And that is the way to look at the Warren Report, because it has never been impeached, and it never will be. Thank you.
We're going to have questions in a moment if you'd come up to the microphone. And I just want to get, hearing both David Kaiser and Max Holland, you both are saying that you believe Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy. He would seem to be of a one on the big issue, but there's a bad energy between you two. And what is it, Max, that you feel that David is mispresenting? And David, what is it that you feel Max is, since you both on the seminal part of Oswald being the killer are on the same page?
Well, there are two important questions on the assassination. First, who killed the president? Who was responsible for the shots fired in Dealey Plaza? On that, David and I agree. The second question, though, is even if Oswald did the deed, did he have help? Were there people behind him? Was he part of a larger conspiracy? That's where we differ. David went through all the records, or many of the records at the National Archives. I tip my hat to him. But he concocts information when he wants to. He resorts to some of the things that Jim Garrison dredged up in 1967, the Rose Chemery incident. And to give you an example of how he ignores information when it doesn't suit his purposes, Lee Harvey Oswald tried to kill a right-wing general named Edwin Walker in April 1963. Now, from Oswald's perspective, killing a general who he thought was an American Hitler and killing President Kennedy was not all that big a stretch, because both represented American imperialism and a threat to Castro's Cuba. But for most Americans, of course, it had a lot of dissonance. Walker and Kennedy? Well, in David's book, he says he really doesn't understand why Walker would be a target of Oswald. And to me, that's a fundamental void, misreading of Oswald. He presents Oswald as a cipher, completely devoid of any motivation, designs of his own. Anybody who reads about him, and they're very good books, including one by Norman Mailer about Oswald, you can't treat him as a cipher.
Can I respond to that? Let David get a response. Then we will. And get in line, guy. Anybody, we'd love to get some questions, so just stand up there if you could.
All right. One of the things that you have to understand if you're going to be a serious historian about anything is that just because a crazy person like Jim Garrison believed a certain piece of evidence doesn't mean that that evidence is false. I didn't say anything was true because Jim Garrison said it was true. Everything that's in the book, and those points that Max is talking about aren't critical to the main argument anyway, but I stand by what I said. Anything I said was based on the original evidence as it appeared. And I made very clear what I thought about the Garrison investigation, which is pretty much what Max thinks about it. I'm sorry, what was the last point you were making was, oh yes, about Walker. Yeah. Actually, I had some new information about it, which is in there. I'm not so sure that Oswald tried to kill Walker. I'm sure that Oswald shot at Walker. I will say that if Oswald had attempted to kill Walker with the same determination that he attempted to kill President Kennedy, Walker would have been dead. Oswald just fired one shot, didn't hit him, and apparently ran away. It is a mysterious incident open to several possible interpretations, but I'm not going to try to spin that out now. Again, I'm willing to let my use of evidence be judged by any impartial person. There were many times in the course of writing the book, in the course of writing the research, when I found myself kind of grinning to myself and thinking, gee, if I wanted to prove that the CIA or Lyndon Johnson was behind this, I could do a better job than anybody else has. But I didn't, because that isn't what I thought. Oh yes, as for Oswald being a cipher, I don't think that's really what I said. I do think Oswald is an extremely enigmatic figure. The problem, well, no, what happened was that I discovered, as I say, that Oswald's whole performance in New Orleans with respect to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee fit perfectly into what the FBI was trying to do to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee at that time, namely to discredit it and portray it as a communist front. And I found a couple of other things which I want to mention because I thought they were highly significant. A day or two after the assassination, an assistant director of the FBI wrote a memo on what we're doing about the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. And he talked about the COINTEL program that they were running, how they infiltrated it, how they were trying to start feuds within it, and how they were trying to discredit it in the press. And that's what Oswald did. He successfully established, wittingly or unwittingly, if you will, by his radio appearance in New Orleans, that it was really a communist front and that he had been to the Soviet Union and so on. But anyway, now, so that memo laid that out. A new copy of the memo was prepared for the Attorney General on what we've been doing about the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. It was the same memo about the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, but the COINTEL program, part of it, was left out. Second thing, 12 years later, 1975, the Church Committee is looking into COINTELPRO in a big way, and the FBI tells them a lot about how it was done. And for instance, that they discredited the Du Bois Club in some southern city by founding a fake chapter of the Du Bois Club, exactly what Oswald did with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. And the FBI submitted a list of targets, but they left out the Fair Play for Cuba Committee from the list of targets. That was in 1975. I don't think I'm a chronically suspicious person, but I can't help but think that maybe somebody at the FBI was worried that it might open up some unpleasant avenues of investigation if they were to open that up. Again, as to who was involved in that, as to who might have been in that, there's a lot more in the book. There's one figure actually in the book who had been a staffer for the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee. Briefly, he had been a university president in Dallas. He ran his own anti-communist organization. And his name is Dr. Robert Morris. And some evidence came to light after the book came out that linked him very closely to Lauren Hall. And there are other things, and he's somebody I'm a little more curious about with respect to the counterintelligence efforts that Oswald might have been a part of. The other thing is, read the letters Oswald wrote to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, to the Communist Party of the US, to the Socialist Workers' Party, trying to make contact with them, and see how they responded to them. And it is clear, A,